Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canali and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Joining me today is the author of 21 books, 16 New York Times bestsellers. He's a producer, journalist, known for his biographies with Diana Ross, Marilyn Monroe, Michael Jackson, Madonna, the Kennedys, Hilton family, Beyonce, and the new release, The Women of the Bush Dynasty. He's an entertainment news reporter on Entertainment Tonight, Good Morning America, Today, CBS This Morning, and CNN Headline News. His biographies have been reported as deliciously readable. With a bold writing style, please welcome to the show, J. Randy Taraborrelli. J. Randy, how are you?
I'm good, man. How you doing, Tommy?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to get going on this interview. I know my listeners are going to hear some fantastic stories on some of these wonderful celebrities you've covered. But before we go there, I want to get more into who you are and how you got to where you are. I understand that you're the son of Rocco and Rosemarie. I'm an Italian myself. What part of Italy is your family from?
Sicily.
Sicily. Okay. And was your grandfather part of the Sons of Italy?
Yes, he was. Yes, he was, and used to take me to the Sons of Italy meetings when I was a little kid. So that was cool. I don't know. Being Italian American has always meant a lot to me. It's always meant a lot to my family. There is just a kind of I guess pride that goes along with it, and hopefully, most people feel that way about their heritage. I hope that they do. Mm-hmm. I know that we certainly did in my family, and it's very important. We're stubborn, we're determined, we're ambitious. We can be confrontational. We can be everything that the Sopranos were, but without the murdering instinct.
I can relate to a lot of those things you just said. Where did your love of writing begin? When
I was 10 years old, I started a fan club for the Supremes, the singing group.
Okay.
And in the course of of having that fan club, at the age of 10, I began writing newsletters, for the fans, and I just sort of pecked my way through on a typewriter. And of course, when you're 10, you don't know how to type. I never learned how to type, by the way. I still don't know how to type. I mean, I still peck my way in exactly the same way I did when I was 10. And then when I continued working for the Supremes from the age of 10 until 18. I graduated from high school in Ridley Township, Pennsylvania, a suburb of Philadelphia. I did not go to college. Skipped college. Didn't take any writing classes. None of that. I just went to Los Angeles right out of high school to work professionally for the Supremes as their publicist. Then when they broke up, I was stuck in Los Angeles without a college education. And I was about 20 and really had no choice but to come up with a job for myself, and decided I would become a professional writer using all of the contacts that I had made working for the Supremes, the contacts that I had made in the media, to get myself jobs as a writer, freelancing for magazines and newspapers. So that's how I got started as a writer.
How was it working for the Supremes and Mary Wilson?
It was, fantastic. I mean, I owe Mary Wilson everything. She brought me to Los Angeles from Philadelphia. It was her idea, that I move west and work for the group. She inspired me. Motown inspired me very much. Berry Gordy, all the people, Michael Jackson, the people that I met when I was a kid that I became friends with, taught me the value of persistence and tenacity, and just never taking no for an answer. And, my dad was self-employed, and he was a painting contractor for almost 50 years in the Philadelphia area. And he really sort of instilled in me and my brother this notion that we really, should work for ourselves. And so that's what I ended up doing. I just ended up being self-employed pretty much my entire life. But there's a disadvantage to that, Tommy. And I'll tell you what it is. I'll tell you the truth. If I had to do it over again, I wouldn't do it that way.
Really?
Because the disadvantage to being self-employed your entire life is you get to be my age, and all of a sudden, guess what? You don't have a pension plan. You've never had medical insurance. I have been paying for my own medical insurance since I was 18 years old. You don't have any benefits whatsoever. You never have a paid vacation. I've never had a paid vacation in my entire life. You never have any time off. Basically, you get gypped out a lot. So when I speak at colleges today and they ask me, what do you think about being self-employed? I always say, do yourself a favor, go get a job. Get a job that's going to give you benefits. Hopefully it'll be something that you enjoy doing. Get a job as a writer at a newspaper, or a magazine, or, get an actual 9-to-5 job where somebody else will pay your medical benefits, because believe me, you don't want to have to do that on your own. And I did that on my own from the time I was 18 years old. And my dad was always the type to say, I will bail you out of any trouble you get into. But if you get into a car crash and you don't have health insurance, you're on your own.
I never thought about those disadvantages. I've been self-employed myself for a very long time until you just read them all off. And I'm like, yep, check, check, check.
Check, 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 right?
Yeah. How long is the average time for you to research and write one of your biographies?
Well, Tommy, it's a hard question to answer because my books usually overlap in the sense that I'm usually working on more than one thing at a time.
Okay.
And I often, abandon a project to start another one, and maybe abandon 2 or 3 at a time to start another one. For instance, the latest book that I just released on the Bush women, which is called Grace and Steel, actually started 20 years ago. And the genesis of that book was an interview I did with Barbara Bush almost 22 years ago. And I started writing the book at that time. And then I put it aside and went on to other things and wrote, 10 other books in the interim, until finally a couple of years ago, I picked it back up again. So, there's not really a process where there's a day when I start a book and a day when I end it. Usually I'm working on a bunch of different books at the same time. Right now, I'm working on 3 different books, as well as 3 television shows. So there's always this sort of creative process going on. And if I get bored in one avenue, I can always just sort of change over to something else.
For those that may be listening that might have the aspirations to go and do what you are doing, can you speak to them regarding what some of the challenges are of trying to be a writer for celebrities?
Well, the greatest challenge for me before I was known was the credibility factor. When you're just, some Italian guy in Los Angeles that nobody ever heard of, and you're trying to get an interview with, some major star, it can be really tough breaking through. The only way that I was able to do it, and what I tell kids today, is, you as I said earlier, you just can't take no for an answer. No is the quickest response that most people have to young people trying to break into any business. And I think that half the time a no is just used as a device to see what your reaction to it is. And I can tell you right now that the best reaction to a no is to just not accept it. And the only way that I was able to eventually break through and have the credibility that I would eventually have to be able to use my name value to get an interview was to just be, very persistent and very tenacious about it. I used to do things that I would never do today, which I would, I stalked Dean Martin once, I stalked the poor man every night for a couple of weeks and watched him eat dinner in an Italian restaurant in Beverly Hills until I had the nerve to go up to him and ask him for an interview. I would do anything that I could possibly think of to get a story. And, and that included knocking on people's doors and having doors slammed in my face. And, I remember when we were trying to find Marilyn Monroe's sister for my book, The Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe, my research team and I figured out that her half-sister was living outside of Pasadena. And we went and spent the entire day knocking on people's doors. And every time a woman would answer the door, we would ask the question, are you Marilyn Monroe's sister? And 99% of the time, they would slam the door in your face. But believe it or not, at one point, somebody actually answered the door. And I said, are you Marilyn Monroe's sister? And the woman said, well, yes, I am. And invited me in. And it was actually her half-sister, So you never know how things are going to work out. But you do know, though, that if you don't give up, it sounds cliche and it sounds like hyperbole, but if you don't give up, you're going to be able to make it.
I always say no today means yes tomorrow. That's kind of the motto I go by.
I love it.
Where do your ideas for the books come from? Are they personal connections with these people and families, or is it something that gravitates you to these particular subjects?
I have never written about anybody that I've not been passionate about. I choose my subjects based on how I feel about them.
Okay.
If I've never written about somebody I don't like, in other words, and in fact, I don't think it stretches it to say that I've never written about somebody I don't love, and it's very difficult undertaking writing a book and sort of absorbing yourself in another person's life. I can't imagine doing all of that if I don't really love that person. And plus, I think it does such a disservice to that subject to have a biography written about you by somebody who doesn't like you. Mm-hmm. The goal of all of my books is always the same, which is I want my readers to love the subject by the time they finish the book. Now, that doesn't mean that you're not going to dislike that person sometimes along the journey, because these are, complicated, complex people. And that's why they're interesting for me to write about. They don't always make the right decisions. And hopefully, as you read the book, you begin to understand that, that they're living, very human experience, just like you and I, and we often don't make the right choices either. But that doesn't mean that there aren't moments of great redemption in all of my books. And by the time you finish the book, I pretty much always leave on an upbeat note, except in the case of a celebrity who dies at the end of the story. That is a little difficult to,
Sure.
I knew Marilyn Monroe was going to die at the end of that book. And I was like, there's just absolutely nothing I can do about this. I really wanted to try to find a way to end on a better note than on her death. But unfortunately, it was impossible. However, when we did the movie, the miniseries for Lifetime, The Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe, based on my book and starring Susan Sarandon as Marilyn's mother, in television, you're able to do a whole lot of things that you can't do in real life. And in the TV version of my book, we did have a happy ending. We left on a sort of a dream sequence of Marilyn and her mother kind of meeting in the great beyond, lying on a beach, having a wonderful day, and it was just like, wow, I wish that I could have ended the book on that note, but you can't fictionalize anything in my books, but you can do a lot of fiction and dramatization on television. And we were able to kind of clean up that ending a little bit for the TV version of The Secret Life of Marilyn Monroe.
When I went through all the books that you have written, is it done on purpose or just coincidence that the majority of them are on powerful women?
It's really not a coincidence. I love telling women's stories, and in particular, I love telling powerful women's stories. I just think that women are, generally more complicated than men. An exception to that, I think, might be Frank Sinatra, who is an extremely complicated person and was just great to write about because of all of his complexities. But women have a sort of a sensitivity that makes them a little bit more complicated for me. And when women, get angry and stand up for themselves, that's always a great chapter in my book. And all of my books, there's a line that if you read my books carefully enough, you're going to find this one line in every single one of my books. And that line is, and then she turned and walked away. That line is in every book I've ever written, so because in every book I've ever written, a woman turns and walks away. And I just think that, that says it all about the way I feel about the powerful women that I've written about.
Do you have any idea how many books you've sold total?
Tommy, I have no idea. I just can't even imagine what that number would be.
Me neither. I was hoping you may have some sort of estimate, but it's a lot, people, I'm telling you. In 1985, you did Diana Ross, a celebration of life and career of Diana Ross. And then in 1989, Call Her Miss Ross, which has been updated in 2007. For this particular topic, the question I have is, why the title Call Her Miss Ross?
Well, it's funny because the original title of that book was Call Me Miss Ross. And then the publisher of that book felt that it sounded too autobiographical, and they changed it to Call Her Miss Ross. But the purpose, the point behind it is that when she was young and first starting out at Motown, Berry Gordy, the president of the label, had everybody at the label and all of the other artists call her Miss Ross to sort of distinguish her from the rest of the Motown family. This, of course, did her a great disservice because, it separated her from her colleagues. But Barry felt that she should be separated from her colleagues. He felt that she was different and better than her colleagues. And he felt very strongly, as he once told me, where Diana Ross goes, so goes Motown. And so that's where it came from. Call Her Miss Ross was my first New York Times bestseller. I've known Diana Ross since I was 10 years old. So we have a long history. I think that she is, a great superstar, a fascinating lady, and she must be somebody I have a lot of interest in because I have written 3 books about her, and I think that's kind of an unusual thing.
The reason I asked the question is I didn't know if it was true or not that she does not prefer to be called Diana.
Well, I don't think that that's true today.
Okay.
The wonderful thing, and the reason why I keep going back to this subject and writing new books about it, is because she changes as she gets older, and I think that, and I have changed as I've gotten older, and as I've gotten more experience as a writer, and I think that one of the things that people don't really understand is a book is as much a reflection of the writer as it is of the subject. And, there's sort of a fallacy, that is prevalent among many readers of my books, that a book should just be, the facts, just the facts. If you want just the facts, that's a Wikipedia entry. A book is the writer's interpretation of the facts. That's what a book is. It's a writer's interpretation of the facts. And in that interpretation, you get to know as much about me from the way that I've interpreted the facts as you do the facts. Mm-hmm. And so with Diana Ross, to answer your question, yeah, of course, when she was young and in her 20s and 30s, she really wanted to be called Miss Ross. I mean, she's 75 years old now. She has a lot of, her priorities are completely different mm-hmm. than they were when she was, 40, and And I think that that's hopefully the way we all are. I mean, I like to think that none of us are the same today as we were 20, 25 years ago. And I like to think that we're all better. You know, in some cases, maybe we're not, but I like to think that we are.
Another book I wanted to talk about, we're not going to hit them all, people. I'll put a link in the show notes where you can go check out all the books that Randy has and where you can get your hands on them. You did a book, Laughing Till It Hurts, in '88 about Carol Burnett. What is one thing about Carol Burnett that maybe the average person is not aware of?
You know, I love that book. It was, you know, such a pleasure to work with her. I think that what people really don't know is that, you know, the entire time that she was hosting the Carol Burnett Show and starring in the Carol Burnett Show, for most of those years, she was dealing at home privately with the serious drug addiction of her daughter, Carrie. Mm. And I always thought that that was so moving to think that this woman brought laughter into the homes of millions of people every week. None of us had any clue whatsoever back in the 1970s when the show was airing. None of us in the audience had any idea, you know, that she had this personal ordeal going on at home at the same time. And to be able to sort of compartmentalize, you know, with your daughter's battle with drug addiction and be able to then go out on stage and be who you are as a comedian is one of the reasons why I called the book Laughing Till It Hurts, you know, because I just thought, wow, this is a woman, this is a very strong woman who I found a lot to admire when I wrote that book.
In '97, Behind the Legend, Frank Sinatra, it's a New York Times bestseller twice. You kind of hinted on a little bit about just how involved Frank Sinatra, just the name itself brings a lot of people to whatever their thoughts are of Old Blue Eyes, and either from a musical standpoint to mafia ties to Marilyn Monroe. I mean, the list goes on and on. How did, or is it still untold, the story?
Well, I mean, I hope I told it. I went back and did that book like 3 times. But you know, part of the mystery of Frank Sinatra is the enigmatic nature of the man. When I was a kid, my grandmother had 3 framed pictures on the wall in her kitchen: JFK, the Pope, and Frank Sinatra. So I grew up, you know, completely immersed in Sinatra history. And when I was a little kid, I vaguely remember, but I do remember when Frank Sinatra Jr. was kidnapped. And I made a decision when I was writing the Frank Sinatra book that I wanted to find this guy who kidnapped Frank Sinatra Jr., because I always wanted to know, what kind of a dope do you have to be to kidnap, of all people, Frank Sinatra's kid? I mean, you know, you might want to kidnap Bob Hope's kid. Maybe you get away with Bing Crosby's kid, but, you know, there are lots of people who you could, you know, perhaps have the nerve to kidnap their kids. But Frank Sinatra, really? Mm-hmm. That guy? And I found him, and he was a fantastic interview. And his name is Barry Keenan. I found him in Florida. And I flew him up to Los Angeles and put him up at the Beverly Hills Hotel, because the Beverly Hills Hotel has a restaurant in it called the Polo Lounge. And the Polo Lounge is where Barry Keenan and his friends came up with the idea to kidnap Frank Sinatra Jr. So I wanted to sort of take him back to the scene of the crime, right? And I did that. And, you know, and it was really kind of a dream come true for me to really sort of get behind the psychology of a guy, you know, who thought that would be a good idea.
And did you find out anything that you didn't write about that you found interesting from this gentleman?
I wrote about everything. Okay. I mean, if you read that book, I didn't leave anything out. I just thought he was a great interview. You know, of course, he was on drugs at the time, and that explains a lot of his decision-making process. And, you know, that he actually told me that he he had heard, because he went to school, get this dude went to school with Nancy Sinatra. So Frank Sinatra Jr. was kidnapped by a guy who went to school with his sister, right? And he had heard from Nancy that Frank Jr. and Frank Sr. didn't get along. So in Barry's twisted mind, he thought that if he kidnapped Frank Jr., it might somehow bring father and son closer together. It's true. All that's in the book. You got to read it. It's pretty great.
2001, Madonna, an intimate biography. It's been translated into 30 languages. You spent over 10 years researching it. It's been updated in 2002, 2007, and 2018. Madonna is another person that's fascinated by people in the general public. And as you alluded to earlier, somebody who's gotten older has definitely changed from who she was back when she was Material Girl, which I'm sure you've researched and know as well more than anyone.
Well, the interesting thing about Madonna is that, you know, she and I have had our battles over the years. And when I was a kid, I wrote an article about Madonna, and I just was really not impressed with her. And it was during this period of time that she was doing the sex book, and she was doing erotica, and there was a lot of S&M in her stage performance. And I don't know, I just didn't think that it was that great at that time. And I wrote an article about her after I interviewed her, and I said she's everything that you think she is and less, right? And needless to say, she didn't speak to me for about 5 years. But you know, I when I started that book, it was around that time, and I put the book aside for that very reason, because I felt like, wait a second, this is a woman who I have a feeling is going to be very different when she hits 40, 50 years old. I mean, this is a woman who is in transition, and for me to write about her right now, before she has a chance to have this great arc in her life, would not be fair to her. So I dropped it, and I picked it up many years later, after she had discovered Kabbalah, after she had married Guy Ritchie, after she had 2 children, and after she was an actual real person, as opposed to a cartoon character from MTV. And I'm so glad that I did that, because if you read that book, you really get a sense of the journey that she was on, that would have been sort of aborted had I written the book when I first started it. And when you read it today, you get the full story, and it's a great evolution of a great woman. And today she is everything that you think she is and more, as opposed to what she was back in the 90s.
How is your relationship with her these days then?
Oh, you know, we're cordial, we're cordial. She's tough, man. You know, I've had many interviews with Madonna, and, and it just depends on how you find her that day. But the interesting thing about her is that she remembers every little fight you ever had. She's Italian, dude. So she's just like me in that respect. She remembers everything. And so, you might have a little bit of an altercation with her, but believe me, she's the type who 30 years later, it's been like 30 years since I did that article. She would come up to me today, 30 years later, and say, "How dare you say I was everything that you thought I was and less?"
Italian women sometimes can be difficult to deal with.
Yep.
Jay, Randy, what was your first meeting ever with Michael Jackson? And do you feel like he was misunderstood?
Well, my first meeting with Michael Jackson was when I was about 14 years old. And I was, as I said earlier, working for Diana Ross and the Supremes. And Diana Ross she was introducing this group, the Jackson 5, to the world. And their first concert appearance just happened to be in Philadelphia, my hometown, and at the Philadelphia Convention Center. And so Diana Ross invited me and my mom and dad to the show. And after the show, I went backstage, and Diana introduced me to Michael Jackson. And that's how I met Michael. And then we became friends. And then I grew up and became a reporter, and he grew up and became Michael Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I did all of sort of like the big moments in his life. Michael Jackson turns 16, Michael Jackson turns 18, Michael turns 21, Michael marries Lisa Marie Presley, I did all that stuff. And then of course I wrote, a bunch of books about him. Yes, we were friends for 40 years. And so I feel like I actually understood Michael. And yeah, I definitely think he was misunderstood. But I also think that it was, partly his fault. I am not the kind of person who sort of absolves another person of all of the responsibility of their lives. I just think that there is a way for you to live so that you are not misunderstood. One way is to make yourself very clear. And Michael and I always disagreed about one thing, which was I was never a fan of him identifying himself with his childhood in a negative way. I used to tell him, Michael, none of us had a good childhood. Like if you really think about it, we all of our childhood sucked, and you've got to move past that. And Michael was never able really to move past it. And he kind of always, lamented his lost childhood and his missing childhood. And I don't know, but, for me, I just wish that he had not done that, because I think that just made him seem peculiar in the minds of a lot of people. And then, it just became a source of rumor and innuendo in his life.
In 2005, you did over 6 months of coverage of his molestation trial, and you were the only CBS News TV reporter in the courtroom for the verdict. How did you become the only person in there?
Well, I covered the entire trial and all the pretrial hearings for CBS. The reason that I was hired by CBS was because I knew Michael, and they wanted somebody who was going to be able to sort of give an inside point of view about the psychology of Michael Jackson during the course of this trial. A lot of people thought, well, how's Taraborrelli going to be objective? Well, guess what? I'm not going to be, because I know the defendant and had known him since I was a little kid. So objectivity was not really the goal. Empathy was the goal. That's what I was after during the course of reporting for CBS. I was after empathy. And I hope I achieved that. The reason I was the only person in the courtroom from the network was because each network was only allowed one guy.
Ah, gotcha.
And they were so cool to me, CBS News, that there was another guy covering the trial. It was two of us. Vince Gonzalez was the other guy. And CBS said, no, you know what? JRT belongs in that courtroom. I mean, you really need to be sitting there right behind Michael when that verdict comes in, And I was nervous about it, man, because the night before the verdict, I was sitting in a restaurant, and one of the sheriffs came over to me from the Santa Maria courthouse. And he said to me, dude, you've got the best seat in the house. And I was like, why? And he said, because you're sitting right behind Michael, the defendant. And when we find him guilty, we're going to rush him out of that courtroom so fast, you will know what hit him. So keep your eyes on him. And that was such a scary thing to think, to have put before me, that this man had already decided that Michael was going to be found guilty. And he was a sheriff, So it just really showed me that the mentality in Santa Maria at that time was, really against Michael in many ways. And I went into the courtroom that day very nervous that Michael was going to be found guilty and my friend was going to end up behind bars. And I could tell you right now, Michael Jackson would not have survived if he had to go to prison. But sure enough, as I sat there, he was found not guilty on each and every count. And that was quite a day.
How bad was the pain pill addiction, and how long had it been going on?
It was the addiction was very bad, and it went on for a very long time. And I actually think it started around 1993 during the first allegations against Michael in 1993. Because I remember Michael calling me from, I don't know, maybe Hong Kong or Beijing, or I can't remember where, Bangkok, I think. I don't know where it was, but he sounded like he was really out of it. And I called up his publicist, Bob Jones, after that phone call. And I said, wow, I think Michael might be on drugs. And Bob said, absolutely not. That's impossible. And it did seem impossible because Michael Jackson never did drugs when we were young. Never. Michael wouldn't even take aspirin. So to think that he was beginning to abuse prescription medication was just beyond all reason. But ultimately, that's what happened. And it was Elizabeth Taylor who, maybe less than a year later, after that phone call, helped get him into rehab.
For you people that are Michael Jackson fans, you got to read The Magic, The Madness, The Whole Story. It's done in 2009. There'll be a link in the show notes for that as well. Before we go on with Jay Randy, I want to bring you guys up to speed on something I have tried and I found surprisingly not just good, but excellent. It's called Only 3 Snack Crisps. It's one of the most delicious, healthy chips available to snackers today. Spelt flour, sea salt, and spring water is all you'll find in this delicious 130-calorie treat. They are perfect with your favorite dip, on the go, in between meals, and as a bonus, they are vegan-friendly too. Order your 3-pack bundle today at only3snacks.com. That's only3snacks.com, and I'm telling you, they are fantastic. Jay Randy, we talked a little bit about Marilyn Monroe. It's been on the New York Times list since 2009 and again in 2012 as the ebook. Like you said, there was a mini series on Lifetime in 2014. You talked about how it was hard to put an end to that book because she had died. But the question I have is, there are some pictures in that book that have never been seen before. How did you obtain these photos?
Well, for me, the important thing is to give my readers something that they have never seen before. I did the same with Elizabeth Taylor. And I think that when you have a person like Marilyn or Elizabeth Taylor, who's, two of the most photographed women in the world, if you can give your readers photographs that they've never seen before, that's amazing. That's golden. And so, I contacted photographers who had taken pictures of Marilyn to ask them, did they have photos, in that they were keeping privately that they had never released to the public. And you'd be surprised, man. A lot of photographers do, that they have their personal favorites, and they don't release them to the public because they don't want to share them. They want them to be, they're personal. They want them to be held personally. And if you can get a photographer to say, okay, it's been 50 years. I'm going to let you have this shot for your book. That's great. And the photo on the back of the book is a picture that was never seen before. So we were able to do that quite a lot with both Marilyn and Elizabeth Taylor.
You've written 4 books on the Kennedys. Mm-hmm. Do you feel the fascination with this Kennedy family will ever fade?
I sure hope not. Because I got number 5 and 6 in mind right now. The Kennedys are such great subjects, because all 4 of my books about them have been New York Times bestsellers, and 2 of them became television miniseries. And I just finished writing the pilot to the Jackie Janet Lee series that we're doing based on my book, Jackie Janet and Lee. I just finished writing it myself. What I love about the Kennedys is I love their flaws. Their humanity, I think, reminds us of ourselves. And I think that when you strip away the celebrity and the prestige and the entitlement and the money from the Kennedy story, you just have an American family doing its best to get through the day. And that's how I view the Kennedys. I've always felt that they were just another sort of dysfunctional American family just trying to get through the day. And I have, I mean, a lot of people maybe don't know this, but Jackie Kennedy was my first editor. I mean, how I got started as an author was Jackie Kennedy calling me up when I was working at a magazine and asking me if I wanted to expand a series of articles about Diana Ross that I had written into a book. And I turned her down because I was a kid. I was in my 20s and I was nervous about writing a book. I had only written magazine articles and I couldn't imagine writing 150,000 words when, 2,000 words was my limit. But then the magazine I was working for went out of business, and I was talking to my mom and I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do, with my life. And my mom said that those magic words that you never think your mom is going to ever say to you, which is, you should call Jackie Kennedy. And I did. And I said, do you remember me? And of course, she's Jacqueline Onassis, and she was working at Doubleday Publishing Company in New York. And she said, yeah, I remember you. And she sent for me to come to New York, and I sat down with her, and that's how I wrote my first book. So I had a lot of experiences with Jackie over the years, and to be able to write about her now today from the vantage point of having known her is a very different experience, I think, than another writer who might want to write about her who never met her, because one of the things it does is it keeps me in check. Because it's very easy when you've got sensational people like Jackie to go to cross the line, and it's a lot harder if you have the image of this woman in your head sitting across a desk from you, holding you to account, I spent many, many, many nights thinking, okay, what would Jackie think about this? And actually be able to know sort of what she would think, as opposed to kind of maybe, imagine it. Like I could actually see her face and know what she thinks, right? That keeps a writer like me in check. Make sure that it keeps me honest, and so that's one of the reasons why I keep going back to the Kennedys.
I'm anxious to hear your take on this thing, because when I think about the whole Kennedy thing, I remember I think it was After Camelot miniseries. And when I picture Jackie Onassis, my brain goes to Katie Holmes and how good she was.
Thank you, man. Wow. That's so great to hear. The first day that Katie was on set as Jackie was such an incredible day because, I had known Katie and we had, worked together for like almost a year on the show before we actually started filming it. And she was Katie, and she's great, by the way. But on that first day, when she walked out onto the set as Jackie, that was a moment for me because I knew Jackie, and now here is Jackie again, as and she looked exactly like her, and she talked like her, and she, Katie did the homework. Katie had a book that was an enormously thick scrapbook in her home of photographs and clippings and newspaper articles and all sorts of Jackie memorabilia that she had put together. It was called her inspiration book. And so when she finally had the opportunity to play Jackie, she just sort of embodied it. And, I thought she was an incredible Jackie in our show After Camelot. I was really honored to work with her and really honored, to see her bring my book to life. She did such a great job. Thank you for mentioning it. And thank you for watching it too. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely. And again, listeners, you need to get your hands on this and take a look at it and spend some time. It's very well done. And if you have any fascination about the Kennedys, which a vast majority of people listening probably do, you need to watch this and read Jay Randy's books. There's 4 of them. His new one, March 2nd, 2021, Grace in Steel, Dorothy, Barbara, Laura, and the Women of the Bush Dynasty. I guess I could call you a Bush family historian then. Would that be correct?
Yeah, you certainly could. I mean, I just sort of like, I embrace that family. it's not about politics for me. None of my books are really political. You know, the Kennedys are Democrats, the Bushes are Republicans. I mean, I don't care about any of that. What I care about is patriotism, and I care about public service. And you know, there's sort of a pejorative that's been attached in recent years to so-called career politicians, and you know, the pejorative thinking is, you know, if you're a career politician, that means you must have some kind of hidden agenda to make money and profit off of your politics or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that it's really difficult to be a politician. And being a career politician means that you have been, it's been your choice to serve the public for most of your life. Like, you're a public servant. And I just think that there is something admirable about that. Now, of course, you know, there have been lots of public servants, you know, who've not served the public in a very good way. But I'm talking about the public servants like the Bushes, you know, who I just think that though George W. Bush made a lot of mistakes, and he's the first to admit it. And if you read George's book, Decision Points, he is really honest about his mistakes as a president. I have a lot of admiration for that. In fact, his book really inspired me to want to know more about him, because any man like George W. Bush who will cop to his mistakes as a president is somebody I think we need to applaud, you know. And when George W. was president, I was not his biggest fan. I really was not, you know. But when I had a chance to meet him and sort of feel his genuineness, you know, like he's such a genuine person and he's got such great heart, just like his father and his mom, Barbara Bush, who I interviewed, and Laura. I mean, I love these people. So yeah, to tell you, I hope people read the book, Race and Steel. It goes all the way back to 1901 to Dorothy Walker Bush, who is George H.W.'s mother, who is another amazing character in history that has never been written about before. And I had the great honor of being able to write about her for the first time. And it's called Race and Steel. It's on sale now, and I love it.
And if I can give you listeners a little cliffhanger on another reason why you should probably get this book, it talks about an alleged affair between former President George W. Bush and a staffer. And I'll leave it there. Go get the book and you can find out more about it. Jay Randy, what kind of upcoming projects do you have that we all can kind of look for in the future?
I used, you know, the funny thing about, well, how can I put this? During the pandemic, I realized that I was about to waste an entire year of my life. And I just felt like I didn't want to do that. And so I decided that I was going to learn how to write screenplays so that I could adapt my own books into screenplays. My previous television miniseries on my books have all been adapted by other writers, not me. I've written the books, other people have written the television shows. But I just felt like the time had come for me to write my own shows, as well as my own books. And so I took the year to learn how to do that. And then I took the year to convince other people that I could do that, because there's a big difference between knowing that you can and convincing other people that you can, especially in my business where you're viewed pretty much as the way that they see you is the way that they always want to see you. And I've had 16 New York Times bestsellers. And so people think of me as that guy. And so for me to suddenly become this guy, it's been a bit of a transition, but I was determined and I did sell my first show. I can't tell you what it is yet because we just closed a deal last week, but I sold my first script, my first pilot, and my first series, and it's based on one of my books, and it'll be airing next year. So that's the thing that I'm working on right now. Is I'm working on this show that I created and that I wrote, which is based on one of my books, and I'll be able to talk more about that very soon.
That is exciting. Yeah. You mentioned you have 16 bestsellers. Last question I have is, what do you want your legacy to be?
Tommy, I got to tell you that I've done like 25,000 interviews, and that's the first time that question's ever been asked of me. And I feel like I need to give you a good answer, because I think the answer to this question is going to be my legacy. So, I don't know, man. I hope that people just remember me as this guy who did his best to tell the complicated stories of others in a way that made them human, and in a way that made us be able to relate to them, and in a way that we were able to see ourselves in them, see our flaws in their flaws, see our victories in their victories, and see ourselves in their lives. That's what I've always wanted to do. Right? And that's how I started out in this business, wanting to do that. And I still want to do that. And so I hope that that's my legacy. I hope my legacy is that I was able to do it.
In my opinion, I think you've done it fantastically. And one thing that's very precious to me is time. And I want to thank you for your time and being on Before the Lights, talking about your books and a little bit about your background. I greatly appreciate it.
That's my pleasure, Tommy. I really appreciate you having me. Thank you, man.
People, if you want new merchandise, I know you've been asking for it. We have a stainless steel water bottle. We got stickers. We got pillows, everything you've been asking for. Go to BeforeTheLightsPod/merch and you can get it there. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, it's at Before the Lights Podcast. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everybody, a salute, a chin chin.